Welcome. So we are talking today about small town co-working. I think today more than ever, smaller towns and even rural areas want to support local entrepreneurs, business owners, and even remote workers who are now free to roam the country with workspace amenities and even the community they need to be productive and stay connected. But we know it is hard to find a sustainable business model for smaller co-working spaces. So my guest today is Brian Watson. He is the co-founder of AltSpace, and he is working on a model that is evolving over time that works to solve this problem of how do we support all the folks in more remote areas that also want access to a great place to work, but to make the business model work. So Brian is going to share his perspective today. Brian, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So Brian reached out and said, let's, do a catch up. And he caught me up in our pre-chat last week on what he's up to. And I said, we definitely need to share this because we have a lot of listeners who want to solve this problem. So Brian, let's just kind of start with, a little bit about your story,
Sure.
Your background, and sort of what was the moment when you're like, I see what, you had the vision for making this work, and tell us where you dialing in from today. Dialing in.
Cool. So, well.
Hopefully you're not dialing in.
So we're calling in from Telluride, Colorado, which is a mountain town in the southwest portion of Colorado. A little bit of my background, we got to talk a little bit last week, and it was a fire hose conversation, I feel like, but
totally.
I think this
we'll slow it down today.
It's been a fire hose experience over the last couple of years. I think as we've seen so much of the industry change and so many of the consumer behavior shifts that we've seen take place. And so I grew up in Grand Junction, which is on the western slope of Colorado, and have always had a huge passion for entrepreneurship. I believe that entrepreneurs are the greatest tool we have in society to solve some of these big challenges, and we should do whatever we can to support them. And so, I helped some buddies build businesses and ended up moving back to Grand Junction. And when I moved back, the question was there anyone else like us? And so we didn't know. And so we actually started an organization, my friend Josh Hudnall and myself, called Launch West Co., which was all about kind of building the ecosystem and trying to gather like-minded entrepreneurs. In Western Colorado, we did tons of events, tons of programming. Over 2 years, we found 1,500 entrepreneurs that no one knew existed. And so the question after that was, sorry, I thought I was on Do Not Disturb. I am now. So anyway, so we found 1,500 entrepreneurs, and we said, what the heck are we going to do with all these people? And so that's when we actually
found them. Now what?
the first co-working space in Grand Junction. And, I think through that experience, we've seen that co-working spaces have the ability to kind of transform communities and have a transformative impact on communities, and especially in rural communities. Accelerate, I was one of the co-founders of Proximity, and so helped kind of grow the company over the last several years. I recently transitioned out in the end of last year, which we can get into a little bit. My wife and I have started co-working spaces. And so anyways, huge passion for rural entrepreneurship. And I think that co-working spaces play a vital part of transforming that. And I think that, right now we've seen this huge shift, as you had talked about, to remote work. And we're seeing, just so many people relocating to kind of these rural areas within the state of Colorado. And I know you're seeing that all across the country. Which is really cool. There's a lot of conversations in the economic development world of like, how do we diversify these economies? How do we bring in these new jobs? And, people did not think the answer was COVID, but, we're seeing that happen organically, right? And I think one of the advantages of living in small or rural communities is, access to the outdoors is right at your fingertips and, right outside. And so lots of people are choosing to live in communities like this or move back to the towns that they grew up in, and they're bringing their big city jobs, which is really cool. And so the next question is, how do we build co-working spaces in rural communities in a way that is sustainable? Because I think that that's another big challenge that I've seen over and over and over again, not only in the spaces that we've run and operated, but with my experience with proximity and getting to work with so many of these communities across the nation. That's always the big question, right? Is like, how do we run these things? The scale is not on the same, in the same universe as like a WeWork or something like that, where you've got
small space, but huge heart and huge passion, right? It's
totally.
It's almost like flipped. So real quick, before we go any further, how big was Grand Junction? How do you define rural? Like,
that's a good question.
Population-ish. Because, Brian, I grew up in a town. I would have to look at the population. There were no stoplights and more cows than people. I cannot help. Every time somebody says rural, that's all I can picture. And I always think, I don't even imagine. There's not even like a grocery store. There's in the town where I grew up, there's like a combo, like feed store, grocery mart, like something else.
Yep.
So that's what I picture when you say rural. So I feel like we should
It's a good question and is worth kind of defining scope, right? And so Grand Junction's the biggest city on the western slope. It's about 60,000. It's 150,000 if you include kind of the adjacent towns, which is Fruita and Palisade, which make up the Grand Valley. But we also have spaces in Montrose, Ridgeway, and Telluride. So Telluride's like 2,500 people. So really changes a lot. My wife runs a accelerator up here in Telluride, and the language that she uses is rural and frontier communities, which is even smaller than rural. And so I think maybe that's what you're thinking about is, the one stoplight town or, places that are really small.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So 60,000 and under, like, is that
and like Montrose is, smaller than Grand Junction, Ridgeway is, I'd have to get, is in that like a couple
you'd have to Google
people that live there.
Yeah.
Same with Telluride.
Okay, really small. Yeah. Yeah, Truckee, which is the mountain town near us, is, I think, north side of the lake is like 10,000. South side might be 30. So, okay, great. So now we can sort of picture. So how many square feet was the space in Grand Junction?
So the space in Junction is about 5. It depends on the areas that you're talking about. There was a big event center, but like 2,500, 5,000 if you include some of the other
event space
portions of the building and stuff. Yeah.
Cool.
Montrose is 6,000.
Oh, wow.
I think Ridgeway is between 2 and 3, and our space in Telluride is 1,800.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so the range of kind of 6 and under again. Yeah. Okay, perfect. I think that helps people kind of see. Okay, so you very kind of eloquently talked me through, the problems, the challenges with smaller spaces. Like you have big goals in terms of what you want to solve. And the this whole conversation is so interesting right now because so many of these towns are trying to figure out housing, right? Like all the things, integrating people who weren't here before and now they are, and, mixing with the locals and I'll let you color it in. The fundamental challenge with a small space is that the economics just don't really work. Like if you're renting the space, which you'll have to tell us if all of your spaces are leased, then it's just a rental arbitrage model, and you need some more scale. Usually when I run a pro forma, like if you don't own the building, you can't pay a community manager is one big issue.
Challenge.
Sort of under 4,000. I mean, it depends on a lot of things. What's your rent? All the things. So maybe in these markets, rent is cheaper, although I suspect that problem is starting to maybe flip too. And yes, totally. There's no real estate in those markets because the people who, got in and took it. And so now rents are probably going up. So yeah, hard to sort of profit, pay someone to staff it. And then, you talked about, I'd love you to dive into like when folks get grants to run spaces like this and that runs out, then there's not really an underlying business model that can move forward. So yeah, talk a little bit more about like the challenges and then how you're going after solving some of those.
So again, I think, one of the things that we say a lot of times is that co-working spaces, especially in rural communities, are kind of required infrastructure for communities that are wanting to attract and retain professionals working in the digital economy, right? And so they're really important resources. I think a lot of conversations that you hear around rural communities also is like broadband and connectivity. The economics are challenging in those towns as well. And so because there's not density like you have in a city, right? And so it's really cost prohibitive to have fiber run to every home when there's, acres or miles in between homes sometimes. And so
my parents got dial-up like 5 years ago, or broadband.
Yep.
Like I can remember them somewhat recent. My mom would like chase the internet guy and like plead with him to run the lines. Yep. Totally.
And like, as all co-working operators know, fast, reliable internet is so important and is like the most important asset of your co-working space, right? And so in a lot of these towns, if there's not that infrastructure built in place, then, co-working spaces become either the gas station or the Tesla's charging station for folks that are working remotely in these areas. And so, I was talking with a guy who has a Techstars company, and he was like, we're remote, but remote is about flexibility and about lifestyle. When I'm working, if I'm pitching to investors or if I'm talking to our board, like I can't be looking like a doofus because I'm remote, right? I need somewhere that's reliable.
I think that's such a huge point. Right. And it's acceptable to be wherever you want, but if you're trying to get business done and do deals, the internet had better work.
It's got to work, right? And so the flexibility is important, but you need that security and the ability to have a reliable place to work wherever you're at. And so I think that a lot of that has shifted too, like as more people are going remote, there's the utility of these co-working spaces are more important than ever, especially in a lot of these small and rural communities. So to go back to circle back around to the original question, I think we were talking a lot about sustainability, right? And so sustainability has a lot to do with the scale of these companies, and co-working spaces are so dynamic, which is one of the beautiful things about them. But, they're community centers, they're places where people can get work done. Pre-COVID, they were a place where lots of entrepreneurial events and pitch competitions took place and stuff like that. And so your community managers had a lot of different roles. And so the question is like, how do you do all the things with such a small space? And so what we saw is, especially in rural communities, I think co-working spaces are owned or operated by kind of two personas. One is real estate developer who, likes the idea of having a co-working space. And so they incorporate it into a larger project. They have the scale, they have the scope. Yeah. The other one is in rural communities that we see a lot is economic development entities, whether that's a chamber, a government entity, an incubator, whatever. And so I think one of the challenges that we've seen there is, a lot of economic development entities may have a building that already has fiber hooked up, right? How it works a lot of times. And so it's like, cool, we can get a grant and convert this building that's not being occupied that much into a co-working space. one of the challenges that I've seen take place there is that, economic developers wear a lot of hats and have a lot of roles. And so, when you convert a building into a co-working space and stuff like that, again, co-working spaces are dynamic. They're supposed to be a place where there's events, community building, management of the space, management of the people. And so that's another hat that they take on in addition to their existing role, which comes back to the whole sustainability thing, whether it's financial sustainability or time management sustainability, if that makes sense. And so this is a big challenge. Running rural co-working spaces is hard work, but it's important work, and we've seen the benefits of communities that invest in kind of co-working and the entrepreneurial community that it attracts, right? And so the question is, how do you do this sustainably? Because what happens a lot of times in rural communities is you get this like cyclical nature where we kind of talked about that, where it's like when we moved back and started Launch Westco to kind of help boost the entrepreneurial ecosystem in our town, we were in college, so it was like volunteer, a lot of volunteer time and energy and work. And we built a lot of critical mass, but then we started companies and weren't able to focus on that stuff as much. And so then you go back and like a lot of that momentum has dwindled over the years or whatever, or you get a grant, which you may not get the next grant cycle. And so then does it stay there, And I think what's really important to build entrepreneurial ecosystems, there's a really good book called Startup Communities by Brad Feld. And he talks about building entrepreneurial ecosystems is a 20-year commitment, in that you have to commit 20 years every single day. You never get closer, but it really needs to be this long-term, consistent commitment to doing the work and building something. If you don't have those 20 years committed, you get the cyclical cycles that we're trying to break. And so that's a big, challenging problem that's always eaten at me, I guess. And I've gone to conferences with people all over the nation, and I always think like, okay, someone's going to have this like magic bullet solution, and everyone's always dealing with the same problem, is like the sustainability of these things. And so really the goal with Alt Space is to try to build a model that creates sustainability for running and operating these spaces, that can lay a foundation of sustainable revenue, so that we can hire and put people in long-term solutions to do long-term work. Once the co-working spaces are running and we're able to kind of scale up our operations, and we'll talk about how we're doing that, we can hire people to do regional programming long-term, and we've built a sustainable model. And so that's what we're working on.
Cool. So wait, I have a Guy Raz question for you. Did you have entrepreneurs in your family? You're like an entrepreneur, problem solver guy, or was that?
So I guess kind of two things. My grandpa was a business guy, and we would always go to Chicago, and I always loved the kind of business lifestyle. They lived in like a high-rise tower right across the street from Lincoln Park, and so I was always really interested in that. He had built companies and done a lot of that stuff. And then my dad was a pastor, and so is a pastor. And so growing up in the church, we did, have done community building forever since I was a child.
That's interesting.
And so much, we were throwing events, we were doing concerts, we were doing like all of community building work. And I would help out with like the youth group and doing all these things. And so there was a lot of transfer, I guess. Yeah,
that's a little bit of both. Yeah. Solving business problems, sometimes through community.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk about the model. and how
Sure.
you're approaching this. And it's a work in progress, right? Like
Yep.
you mentioned, well, we're trying this and we're still
Yep.
trying to solve this, but
Totally.
and talk about the bigger vision and kind of where you are now. Because you have how many? 5 locations?
With 5 locations, yeah. And
Yeah.
so, this really came out of COVID. So to give a backstory, my wife got a job up in Telluride. She runs the Telluride Venture Network, which is a small business support organization. They do a lot of different things. I was remote. We started working out of a co-working space in Telluride that closed at the beginning of COVID. We're in a mountain town, and so everyone's got tiny little condos that we're living out of and doing the work from home, shared at the kitchen table, when the kitchen table is also in our kitchen living room. We didn't have any space, and so it was challenging the first few months of COVID. We found there was a real estate company that had 3 locations in town, and they didn't need that, and so it was really set up to be a turnkey, co-working space. And so we talked to the landlords and did a rev share with them, management agreement, which I know there's been a lot of innovation on management agreements through COVID and stuff. And I think it's been really good. It allowed us to go in and kind of de-risk the whole situation, which we would not have been able to do otherwise. And so, I had a full-time job. My wife, Bonnie, has a full-time job. And so we wanted the co-working space to get out of the house, and it displaced everyone else in the co-working space that we were working out of. And so, but the goal had to be kind of automation from the start because we were working full-time.
Well, and I think that's a great point, is because smaller spaces, there's a lot of whys to do them, right? People get passionate and they need to be a part of the communities. But if they can't kick off a lot of profit, then the people who run them, to your point, have other roles, be it economic development, or they have the job that pays the rent or the mortgage. That's their reality, right? And so probably whoever was running, the one before it closed was like, well, we got other stuff we're dealing with here. We can't keep doing this and not really probably making money.
Yep.
So
totally.
We can't do it anymore.
Sustainability or the opportunity cost of doing the thing that you're passionate about versus doing the thing that pays the bills. Something's going to give a lot. And so anyway, so we opened the co-working space with kind of the goal of, can we build this thing to be as automated as possible? It was the question. And it was a great test space. It's the space that I'm in today. It's 1,800 square feet. And so one of the hunches, I guess, that we started, or the hypotheses, is that consumer behavior had changed during COVID. The QR code got its comeback. Everyone's used to doing more self-service through COVID and stuff like that. And so we thought that there was maybe potential to implement more processes that allowed people to kind of sign up themselves. We could implement triggered emails that walk them through how to do that and how to get into the spaces and stuff. And so that's how we started. A few months after that, I spoke with the Prox team about the locations that they had, because we started as co-working spaces and then built software for managing them. During the evolution of the company, really a lot of the focus has been on building the software company. And so, we saw that a lot of the spaces kind of really slowed down during COVID, as you saw all across the country. And so it was cool, we have this one location, we're interested in this model. In order to make this thing sustainable, we need to scale it up. And so what if we took the spaces off the hands of the software company, which created a clear line of delineation, which was nice. And so, so we spent last year kind of rebranding all the locations and tying them together. One of the things that we've seen in rural areas is that a lot of people have regional jobs or whatever, or travel a lot. And so being able to seamlessly access all of the different locations, we do our grocery shopping in Montrose because it's so expensive to do grocery shopping up here. So we drive down, we work for the day, get our groceries head back to Junction or head back to Telluride or whatever. And so it creates this really fluid, dynamic way of working, which I think is really valuable. And so, so over the last year, we've gone from 1 to 5 locations. We're running all of them automated, which has done a couple different things. I think choosing the automation strategy has allowed us to develop systems we may not have developed before, or test things that we may not have tested before, but I think ultimately ended up being a lot better, right? And I think the trade-offs were a lot better. And now, as we're scaling that up, we're building something that we do have the square footage capable of building something that's more sustainable, if that makes sense. Just to kind of talk about the strategy or testing things, when we first started, there was more than one frustrated conversations with people not being able to get into the space easily or whatever. But after those kind of conversations and iterating the communication and the emails that we're sending, we've had over 250 drop-ins in the last year that has successfully got in, that are using the space, that give good feedback. I'm so happy this resource was here. I'm visiting my family. I didn't have a place to work or whatever. I'm really glad this is
So these
here.
are non-members. These are not people who have sort of stumbled through the tech process and forgive you because they're members. They're coming in, right, as sort of cold consumers.
Yep.
Yeah,
which is often the most challenging membership type to onboard is your daily
totally.
drop-ins
When
or
I have
whatever.
those conversations sometimes with small spaces, don't do the drop-ins
because
it's so high maintenance, and how do you handle it, right? Because oftentimes the owner will say, well, I can't be there all day, right? So what if the drop-in comes when you're not there? Hey, I just wanted to jump in really quickly before we continue with our discussion. If you're working on opening a co-working space, I want to invite you to join me for my free masterclass, 3 behind-the-scenes secrets to opening a co-working space. If you're working on opening a co-working space, I want to share the 3 decisions that I've seen successful operators make when they're creating their co-working business. The masterclass is totally free. It's about an hour. It includes some Q&A. If you'd like to join me, you can register at everythingcoworking.com/masterclass. If you already have a co-working space, I want to make sure you know about Community Manager University. Community Manager University is a training and development platform for community managers, and it can be for owner operators. It has content, training, resources, templates from day one to general manager. The platform includes mini courses that cover the major buckets of the community manager role, from community management, operations, sales and marketing, finance, and leadership. The content is laid out in a graduated learning path, so the community manager can identify what content is most relevant to them depending on their experience and kind of jump in from there. We provide a live brand new training every single month for the community manager group. We also host a live Q&A call every single month so that the community managers can work through any challenges that they're having or opportunities, get ideas from other community managers, build their own peer network. We also have a private Slack group for the group. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go to everythingcoworking.com/community manager. I would love for you also to talk about, I was thinking about this after our conversation. There's a lot of sort of framing around what makes a co-working space, and the community piece of it. People expect there's a staff person. And so this idea of having automated, there's no community manager, which makes it more sustainable. But did you have to sort of talk yourself into that's okay? It's so talk about kind of the bigger picture, because I think I talk to people who want to do this, and I start with saying, you should probably figure out, but loosely, because I'm not sure I would have believed it myself after, I think to your point, there's a lot of conversations about how do you solve this problem, but no one has really taken a stand. There may be others. I've heard of models here and there. Frankly, I think people sort of dismiss that idea that we could have a space and it's not going to be staffed. So
Totally.
yeah, tell me more about how you are getting over that and helping members shift their expectations.
So again, I think you need to be clear on like what to expect and expectations.
Yeah.
And co-working spaces need to be clear on expectations anyways, right? Like, are you doing the dishes or am I doing the dishes? Like,
totally. There's so many. Right? Am I picking up your coffee mug or are you picking up the coffee mug?
So,
right. Do I clean the
that's
conference
all on
room?
a scale, a sliding scale,
Yes.
right? And
so,
you know, I think being clear about here's who we are, here's what to expect, and in order for this to work, this is what we need you to do as well. So I think that is an important thing to be able to communicate. You know, although we don't have full-time space managers, we do have ambassadors at each one of our locations, which is great for, it's great to have that presence in the space, right? And our ambassadors are selected because they have a vision of the purpose of the co-working spaces as well, and want to engage the community. They want to connect with the people that are moving into town and get them plugged in and stuff like that. And so we're aligned philosophically with our ambassadors. It's not someone just there to get someone online, because we've solved for that already. We talked the other day about kind of the 3 roles of a space manager, which is cleaning is 1/3 of the job. The other third is, you know, events and, you know, getting people signed on. And then the last is really the community development effort. We've tried to eliminate the two, the cleaning portion and the onboarding portion, and really just allow them to focus on the funnest part of the job, which is community building and getting to meet friends. And so that's one of the ways that we've kind of helped bring people in and get them plugged in.
Also, the job description for that ambassador role is then laser clear, right? Because this is the hard part about hiring community managers, is those 3 roles, and they're, you know, it's like, are they good at marketing? Are they good at, you know, bringing in members? Or do they also have a little OCD and they notice when the conference room needs to be clean? It's like, no, nobody is great at all those things. And so you've just like narrowed it down to, I just need you to do one thing. Yeah.
Well, and again, it's like when you start a business with a hypothesis, which is like, I think we can do this, we've got to be laser focused on nailing that first before we spread ourselves too thin on trying to accomplish these other things that we haven't, you know. All of these things are Pandora's boxes, basically. And so I think, you know, to kind of go back to the community building piece, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges that every co-working space has dealt with for the last 2 years is like this huge portion of our business and the why of our business was taken away, you know? And I think that's been a huge challenge for co-working space operators, because space operators are community builders. When you talk to them, you know, like that's who they are. That's why they got into the business. And that's been I think the biggest challenge over the last 2 years. And so where we've really focused is like, okay, the game changed and we have, you know, this window in time to focus on just the mechanics of like getting people in and functionally working in the space, which is kind of the utility part of the business. It's not the sexy part of the business. It's not even, you know, the really fun part of the business, but it is an important part of the business. And if we can nail that, it will allow us, you know, the thing that I'm really excited to go dive back into as we've kind of built up these systems and things are working pretty good, you know, is, okay, well, how do you start doing community engagement and building more at scale, right? And which I think leads us kind of into the next hypothesis of this thing, which is this possible and how do you do it? And I think, you know, my answer to that would be yes. You know, I think we've seen virtual communities pop up everywhere over COVID. We've seen accelerators that, support businesses run virtually over COVID. And so the question is not whether it's possible, because we're seeing it take place all over. I think the question is, what am I going to do to shift my strategy to make this possible? And the way that we did it before is not going to work because the world changed around us, and so I think that that's the next biggest question is, okay, well, under the new context of how we're operating our co-working spaces and how community's building, and even the community members that are coming into our co-working spaces have changed. Like when we were first starting, we did 3 events a month, every month for 2 years straight, that were all focused on entrepreneurs and all of that stuff. All of my members now, when I call them, I'm like, where are you from? What do you do? They're remote workers that are relocating here, not the entrepreneurial community that we had originally, right? And so the services that we provide, the programs that we do, maybe these folks are more interested in going mountain biking with a bunch of new people,
right?
Because that's
I was going to say, they're
came
humans
here for.
too. Remote workers are humans too, but they
Yeah.
don't have the same why as an entrepreneur. Totally. They want to meet people that align with this new lifestyle, which is a problem, that co-working spaces can solve too. So, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, I think as an entrepreneur, it's not my job to dictate whatever, it's my job to observe and see, where do I need to move in order to provide value to our customers, and who are our customers and what are they looking for, right? And so I think that that's really important. I never want to lose the entrepreneurial bend. Like, that's what I have a big passion for.
Yeah.
However, I think so many of the conversations, especially in rural communities, comes back to, how do we diversify our economy? How do we do all these things? And it's like, the men and women who are moving to these places, bringing these jobs, are diversifying the economy in a profound way. That no strategy has ever really had success like this, and so we are uniquely situated to engage in all these new people coming to town and get them plugged in. And maybe they work for LinkedIn today, but maybe we get them plugged into a startup tomorrow, and so I don't know. I think that that's, co-working spaces are, like I said, like uniquely positioned to connect with that new asset that's coming to these communities and engage those folks.
So I'd love to dive a little deeper. I also love you're doing what is, I think, challenging for people with your personality, which is a lot of folks listening, which is like, nail the logistics, right? Like you said, the sort of not sexy part, get people in the space smoothly, and then layer on the community piece. So I'd love to hear how you're automating. Like, what does the workflow look like? Yeah. And we sort of glossed over this, but you come from Proximity. You were one of the co-founders.
Yep.
So I'm sure that Proximity plays a big part in your tech stack. So yeah. So share a little bit about that, and then we could go into what do you think that community layer looks like? Because I'm sure people are like, what do you mean automate, and who handles it, and who does the onboarding? And
it sounds, automation sounds scary, right? And complicated, but I always joke, I'm like, we live in the future. There's technology today that's available that was not available 10 years ago, and for relatively inexpensive costs, right? And so, it's our job, again, as entrepreneurs, to say, what is the technology that's available to me that's going to leverage my capability, right? And so, in order to do all this stuff, we use Proximity. One of the things that's been really helpful, and we could never do it without them, is, they have door access system, they have automated billing, they have, everything is a digital app on your phone. And so, by using their technology, and we can tie all of our spaces together, which create that seamless travel capability. We can tie all of our Wi-Fi networks together. So you sign up once and get instant access to all the locations. And so, proximity is our number one tech stack that we use to allow us to kind of leverage up the scale of our business. The other nice thing is, because all of our spaces are using the same infrastructure, which is proximity store access system, their billing system, the integration that they have with Meraki, that means we can unify the user experience and the onboarding experience because everyone's doing it in the same way.
Same thing.
Right?
Yeah.
And so really it's, okay, what are the, how do we, maybe we need to layer on some communication on top of that when people are coming in, and walk them through how to sign up on the proximity system and how to download the app and where they need to go when they get in the building. And how
right, because the community manager's not sitting at the desk explaining that 6 times a day.
Yep.
Right.
But again, as going all in on this process allows us to refine the exact same experience over and over and over again. And so, when we first started, like I said, there was like angry calls, like I can't get in or whatever. But because we had the same user experience, then it was just my job to say, we're going to iterate that. We're going to make it better. We're going to make it better. And now, cool. Someone signs up. I get an email trigger goes off, walks them through the whole process. No questions. Everything works. Right. And so we can continue to iterate on that process and make it more and more streamlined.
So I'm curious about the lazy human problem, because the lazy human problem is why members, walk up to the community manager and say, how do I book a conference room? Mm-hmm. When there's an app for that and they could do it on their own. So do you get people who just won't read your emails or won't follow along your automation path? Uh-huh. Yeah.
So
can they call someone? Is there customer service somewhere? Okay.
Yep, they can. So I would say 80%, 90% of, the initial questions, this goes back, you've done consulting with co-working spaces all the time, right? And it's if there's problems or challenges, it's my fault because I didn't communicate it well. Right. And so if we communicate it well, if we onboard people well, we don't have those issues. And that's the nice thing about kind of a templated email, is I can continue to refine that and make it better. I still have things that I'm cool, we could, substitute this text with a video eventually, or make it more high fidelity, and communicate more information in one spot, right? Which, you can't do with tours, because you really get one shot and every tour is a little bit different. And so, refining that process over and over and over again, in some ways is easier in the way that we're doing it. But yes, you always get people that are not going to read something, or they missed it or whatever, and so for those folks, they can call us or they can text us, and we answer the phone and we walk them through that stuff, and we can troubleshoot virtually, right? Because of the proximity system and some of the other things that we've put in place. One of the things that we spoke about last time is tours, right? So what do you do with the tour or whatever? And we didn't mean to do this during COVID, but we had places where people could schedule tours online for all of our locations, so book a tour, which location, what date. And there was several times where I was supposed to be in Grand Junction or in Telluride or in Montrose or whatever, and life happened and I couldn't get there. Guess what? We've got cameras in the spaces, and we just called the people, unlocked the door so they could walk in, and we could give them an audio tour. And I was that worked pretty well. Lots of people were like, this is great, we'll sign up. And so was that, can that be refined? Yeah, probably, but I think that there's just different ways of doing things that if we're dogmatic on the way that it's supposed to be done or it has to be done, it has the opportunity to prohibit us from new ways of doing things.
Totally. So is the virtual tour a default now, or does the ambassador do a tour if somebody
just kind of depends.
Shows up? Okay.
We have a form that people fill out when they book a tour. And so oftentimes if no one's going to be there or whatever, I'll just call them and say, hey, I'm not going to be in town that day. I can call you on the phone, or we can reschedule, or I could set up an appointment with our ambassador. What works best for you? Honestly, a lot of times they're like, oh, I'm 3 blocks away from the co-working space. I could just walk over there right now if you can let me in. Sweet.
Right. Just stay on the
and
phone,
so it was
right?
like, yeah, so it's like they scheduled it for a week in advance because that was the process. They didn't really care, so it was like, oh, well, that just expedited the onboarding and stuff like that, and so, I think that comes back to like, if we can reach out to those people and say, here's the options, what's best for you, then they can select and we can kind of go from there.
So you also mentioned centralizing sort of the back end support, because not everything is automatic, right? There's a human that still has to do some things in terms of onboarding and whatnot. Yeah. Talk about what that looks like, and maybe will look like over time.
Yeah. So I think, there's a couple different things. I think when I think about it, there's 2 roles. One is onboarding, do our members get into the space, get online, understand how to do everything? And I think that's been pretty streamlined. Whatever location you're at, you can call someone and we can walk you through and get you all set up. So that's great. The next layer of kind of triggered communication, I think, is I want to start doing more testing of like immediate, like, hey, Jamie, thanks for signing up. I'm the owner. I'd love to book a 15-minute video call with you and like learn
a virtual coffee.
Yeah, totally. Because, again, it's like before I would have walked you to the coffee shop. Now I could send you like a $5 gift card from Starbucks digitally, and get to know who you are and plug you into the community or whatever, and so it's really interesting, again, I get more phone calls with people who I had 2 yesterday, new people who had moved to town, were interested in co-working. And so I just called them and said, hey, here's what's going on. Our spaces are automated, yada, yada. Who are you? I'm an entrepreneur. I just moved into town. Oh, cool. Like, we love entrepreneurs. We want to support you guys. My wife runs the accelerator.
Right.
How can I help you? And they're like, this is amazing, and that was always the magic of the onboarding walkthrough, right? Was not how do you get online, but can I make a genuine connection with you and support you? And I think what I'm learning is that doesn't have to be in person. I think that we can do that in this kind of hybrid world that we live, right? Like, do I have to be face to face with you to make a genuine connection, get excited about who you are and what you're doing and how we can support you? No, I don't think we do.
And connect you to others, right?
And
you talked about others. I run masterminds for co-working space owners, and sometimes they meet in person, which has been happening more often post-COVID. But, oftentimes, right, their relationship is online, and I make those connections, or somebody on our team, or, right, you can do, it's always great to see people in person, but it's a competency that you can transfer digitally.
Yeah, and I think it's that, connection always comes back to empathy. And do I have to see you you and I have never met in person, but we've had very dynamic conversations and, and have genuine connection around our interests and stuff like that. And I can send people to you and vice versa or whatever. And we've done that without ever meeting face to face. And guess what? When we meet face to face, we'll be like, hey, how's it going? And so again, I think the biggest thing is like, it seems uncomfortable or weird or obscure maybe on like, how do you do that, but I think I would say entrepreneurs' main job is to wade through obscurity and find the rocks and keep moving forward, Yeah. And so and again, the whole goal of like this crazy test that is seeming to work, and we want to add more spaces and help support more small rural co-working spaces by implementing a lot of these systems for them. Is the goal is to build something that's sustainable so that we have something that works long term, that we can have long term impact, and if we don't build a strong foundation, then we're not going to get there. And so, I think, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And I think, if we just throw the same playbook at it that we continue to do, then we're not necessarily going to get a different result. And so we've got to take swings, we've got to take, apply different strategies. And again, I think I said this earlier, but it's like, we live in the future, we have technology like proximity and stuff like that. And, I'm like, if Elon can build driving cars, then like, surely we can get someone in a building and online, right? Like that shouldn't be that complicated. I think the next thing is, then how do we engage with people at scale, right? And how do we plug them into systems that we can help connect them to tools, people, resources? There's a lot of programs, accelerators, angel investors that want to help support these people in a lot of rural areas. And if we are the connector and we're building to connect to people at scale, and we're implementing systems and databases that we can put them into, then like we can actually be really effective at that. Yeah. And I think that that's the stuff that where the long-term impact and the thing that everyone wants to see, we can move the dial there.
So yeah, paint the 5-year picture.
Yeah.
Do you, do you operate spaces that you lease or management agreement? Can other people opt into this network?
Yeah.
What is it?
So, our model has changed a little bit, I think, as everyone's has, and really what we've done is spend the last year kind of streamlining systems, allowing people to get in, benefit from the utility of the co-working spaces, I would say. And so we're having a lot more conversations with a lot of these smaller and rural co-working spaces that are asking the sustainability question, or having the bandwidth conversation of like, I've already got 10 jobs and now I have an extra job, and so it's not necessarily making tons of money, but has big impact on my community. We want to continue to provide this resource. We want to engage with these entrepreneurs. And so we have managed service agreements where we can go in and implement all of our same tools. And which is great. We're focused in Colorado right now and in rural Colorado, but not limited to that. We're doing this for people all over. And so we can implement a lot of those same systems that have been really effective. So in 5 years, I think what you're really doing is adding kind of nodes on the map, and databases of people that you are connecting with the co-working spaces and stuff like that. I think we'll have lots of spaces that we're kind of helping manage. And, as I had mentioned, my wife runs an accelerator that's gone remote. There's all of these different tools. There's, coding schools that have gone remote. Like these are tools that economic developers, especially in rural communities, talk about all the time. And yet they're trying to do it themselves in person. And so the scale,
everybody's reinventing the wheel on their own.
Yep.
Right.
Where if we lay a strong foundation and then we have the team to support it and put in the infrastructure, we can just start stacking those resources on top. And now you have a database of entrepreneurs that are working in all these communities. You have, mentors from all these different communities that you can plug in and support regardless of where people are from, right? And it always goes back to my big why that I always talk about. When I graduated from university, my favorite professor, his feedback to me was, "You need to leave here," and there's nothing for you here. And he's an economist, and so that's the nature of a lot of these communities, right? And we just believe that you can be successful regardless of where you choose to call home. So much of success that, the reason that people move to cities is because of density, right? And because of the density of tools and resources and people that they can connect and engage with. And that has historically been a challenge in rural communities, but it doesn't have to be. And so if we can develop infrastructure for connecting people, giving them places to check in, connecting them to, regional or virtual resources and people to support them, then you get to have the best of both worlds, right? And so that's what we're working on, and that's what I hope that we get to see over the next few years.
So this is an incredible, effort and story. If folks are interested in what you're up to, where's the best place for them to follow along? Yeah. Or reach out?
They can check us out. It's altspacecowork.com, altspacecowork.com. Or just email me, brianscottwatson@gmail.com.
Ooh, putting the email out.
Yeah.
I love it. We will put both of those in the show notes.
Cool.
And I have your LinkedIn linked up. So I'm super excited. I think this is really smart. I love, your point about it's an opportunity to question how things get done and to say, right, we can't keep doing it the same way and watching small spaces not work and close and get out of the cycle. But
It's
to be able to provide,
So how do we do it in a way that's scalable and sustainable? Because the end goal is to support the entrepreneurs and the remote workers who are living in those places.
Yep, totally. I love it. Thank you for taking the time to share what you're up to.
Yeah,
because it's a work in progress. So we'll have to have you back on to get an update. But I love it. Thank you for doing the work that you do. I think it's going to have a huge impact.
Thanks, Jamie, and thank you for everything that you do. Love the podcast. I listen to it when I run, and I always get lots of good tips and tricks and all that stuff. And you've just been such an advocate for the industry and helped so many different people and do such a great job. So thanks.
Well, we're going to add this episode to the list. Looking forward to that. Thanks, Brian.